Hi all. In this video, we'll be talking about assignment 4. So in assignment 4, the concepts we'll be testing would be primarily dynamic memory allocation. And what if a class contains pointers as its member variables? So uh, in Canvas, you can find the assignment for PDF. And the way we are going to implement dynamic memory allocation and class containing pointer variables as its members is through this example called grocery list. So uh, if you notice, all the assignment files are available here. And inside this folder, when you download it, like always, just point it to the folder where you are downloading the CPP files. And there will be 4 files for this assignment. And input.txt contains the input part for this assignment. And if you notice, all these, like each line represents one grocery list. And the way this grocery list is, it has some errors. For example, notice the first line. The number 3 represents that there are 3 items in this grocery list. But if you notice, this grocery list item has more than 3 elements. Eventually, you will be reading in each line or each item in this grocery list into a dynamic array. And then as you read through, you will be figuring out how many elements are there in this grocery list. And eventually you will be writing back the proper output into a file. So let me show that as well. Just a second. So yeah, so you'll be writing the output in this manner. If you notice, the first line here suggests that this is a grocery list containing 5 items. So the number 5, the correct number of grocery items in this grocery list, was figured out by the C++ program code. So that's the agenda. We will be dynamically creating an array holding the grocery items. And once we know that, or once we figure out that this grocery list contains more items than the initial number that was representing, like for example, uh, initially, it will be assumed that there are 3 grocery items in this list, but as you see fourth and fifth elements, you will be reallocating memory dynamically so that it can hold whatever the number of elements that are there in this grocery list. And eventually, once you write the output to the file output.txt, you will be writing with the updated number. So what is the grocery list? How many items are there and what are the items? That's what you'll be writing. Like that for every line, it's a separate grocery list. For example, the second line contains, it says that there will be 2 grocery items, but in reality, there are 4 grocery items. So when you write the output after correcting the number of items in this grocery list, you would be writing or outputting it to a file in this manner. So that's the aim of this assignment. And to do this, in this assignment, we have one class to write primarily, which we call as grocery list class. And I think the assignment is still loading. Yeah. So this is the grocery list class. And here I just made one mistake. Whatever the class name that says here item, it should be grocery list. So you will be writing a class called grocery list. And this class contains 4 member variables. Notice that we have 3 non-static member variables, which are string of pointer type. Please note the star here, it's of pointer type. And then we have item count and capacity. And also we have a static variable called numless. So let's see what each of this is doing. So we will be writing a class called grocery list. And this class will contain 4 private members, sorry, 3 actually. So the private members are, there will be a pointer variable of string type, so data type, and star denoting that it's of pointer type. Just a second. Sorry, my whiteboard is refreshing. In meantime, Visual Studio Code. So all the files I have it on folder A4, assignment 4. You can download it in anywhere that you want. And Once you open the grocery list.h, you can see that all the four variables or three variables are declared out for you under private. So the first one is of pointer type and it is called as items. Notice that items is a pointer variable, a special variable, and the things that it is going to store would be of data type string. So item is a pointer variable and it is used to store or point to an array containing strings. And then we have item count. Since we are dealing with arrays, item count will be used as something like an index, and capacity is whatever the number that is given against each grocery list item. And in this grocery list class, you will be primarily implementing this function called void resize. And notice that I'm writing this function under private scope so that no one can call this function outside the class definition. Only the members of the class can call it. So that's what we are adding, some sort of protection to this class, which is through private scope. And that's one benefit of using encapsulation. And yeah, whiteboard is black up. So we'll be declaring a variable of string type. Since it is a pointer, we'll use the star symbol, and the name of this pointer is items. And then we will have an integer variable called item count. The primary purpose of this is to use it only for keeping track of array indices. And also we'll be having one more integer variable, which is called as capacity. And yeah, I'll come to the methods that we will be writing shortly. So this is what we will begin with. And I'll switch to main function, or before switching to main function, we'll discuss about the other entities. So there is a static variable. Remember, static is not part of any object. It's part of class as a whole. So the static variable numList is used to keep track of how many input lists that you are reading from the file. So for this file, input.txt, you would be reading 10 in grocery list. So the main aim of this variable static int numList is to store how many lists that you are reading from the file. And we have a default constructor which is called as grocery list. And then there is a parameterized constructor called grocery list, same class name. But notice that it's not accepting all the parameters of class. Rather, it is accepting only one member, which is capacity. And since we are dealing with dynamic memory allocation, recall that the constructor is the best place to delete all the dynamically allocated memory. And to add each item to the grocery list, we have a function called add item. And we also have one more function called as print list. The objective of print list is to write the output of each grocery list to the output.txt file. So that's pretty much about the class functions. So within grocery list.h, you would be writing resize function only. And coming to grocery list.cpp, it is the C++ implementation of all the functions that are member functions of this class. So I have given comments. Your job is to write down all the function definitions according to each comment. And lastly, unlike assignment 3, you will be writing some parts in assignment 4. For example, we have a static variable called numList. So you would be declaring how to initialize a static variable. Remember that any static variable of a class, it should be given in the global variable scope or global scope in main.cpp. So you will be declaring this and setting it to an initial value of 0. So here I have clearly given where and all you should write your own code. And also there will be comments that would be helping you out guys on writing the code. And everything regarding object creation and static variable stuff, you would be writing here. For example, let's see how the main.cpp is, and we'll walk through each part in the assignment. So firstly, the way main.cpp is given is, it will keep on asking for the user for a valid file name. Once the user gives a valid file name, it will proceed with creating the output file, which is called as output.txt. And now from the input file, the way or to read each line, remember each line is a grocery list. And for example, the first line, we have items like milk, bread, eggs, butter, and cheese. So let me write them. So these are all the members of the class. Remember, they are in private scope. And let's say this is the definition of class pretty much. Now, what are the things that we'll be doing in main.cpp is, we'll have the input in the form of input dot txt, and the first line or each line in the input, the first value is a number telling that how many elements are there in the grocery list. And remember, this number could be misleading at the beginning. And strict code. So I have milk, butter, and cheese in the first list. So milk, bread, butter, eggs, and cheese in the first list. So these are all the elements. So the way how this works is the code to read each line in main.cpp. This is taken care of. You don't need to worry about opening the file, reading the contents from the file. So this is already taken care for you. What you will be doing is uh, observe that. So here for every line, that means every line is a grocery list. So for every line that's being read from the file, you have to create an object. So this is where you should create an object called as grocery list, and it should be called as item. So your first step in main.cpp, these are all the steps that you will be doing. Uh, so the first one would be declaring a static variable in global scope. So always remember that static variables start, they doesn't use static keyword. You rather you can start it as a normal variable. So it's of data type int, and the class name is grocery list. And always remember the scope resolution operator and the name. So this is the name that's given in the main.cpp comments. So you should be initializing this in the global scope. So refer to the name. The name should be numlist. So this is how you declare a static variable. After this, the second task is to create um, an object called, I think this is called list. So cross check once. In the comments, I have given clearly what should be the item or grocery list called. So here grocery list should be called as list. So create a grocery list called list. So remember, how do you create object? You will be giving the name of the class followed by object name, and then we'll give parenthesis. Notice that in the comments, I have specifically mentioned that your object should call default constructor. So that means you do not give any parameters within the parenthesis of the object creation part. And then there is one more while loop on line 62. The idea of this while loop is that it is reading each line for you. So the capacity is already read for you, and capacity is read in this form, and it's already read for you. So capacity can be read, and yeah, my bad. I'll just make one quick correction. You don't need to invoke the default constructor. You can involve parameterized constructor and this capacity. Yeah. So this is one correction in the assignment. I'll do it in the PDF, update it and share it as well. So the idea is that when you create an object, pass the capacity value. So this is where you will take capacity value. So at the time of object creation, call it with capacity. So the variable capacity is already created for you. You don't need to do anything here. Just create the object with a capacity. You will be calling parameterized constructor. Now, the third part is the code logic to handle reading each item from the file is already taken care for you. So what you would be doing is would be calling a function called item. So remember that there is something add item this list. So which is right here. So notice the parameters for it. It is accepting a string variable called as item. So what you will be doing is this while loop is taking care of going through each item. So your task is to simply whatever the object that you gave, The third task is that on that object name, pass or call item function. So object name is given in the comments. Please follow it, or if you want, you can have your own object name anytime, anything. So call the function add item, and in this function, your job is to simply pass the variable item. So for each item in the grocery list, the function add item can be invoked. And lastly, your job is to list, which is the fourth step in this main.cpp. So your job is to call print list function. So the way you can call print list would be object name dot print list. So the idea of print list is to how many items that you have read from the file and what are the names of the items you have to write back to output.txt. We'll come back to these two functions in a while. And the last step in main.cpp is to print num or print number of lists read. So for example, input.txt contains 10 lists. So code should be printing something like that. So if you go to Canvas and PDF of the assignment, there is a mock output. So if these are all the input.txt grocery list items, then whenever you exit the code with input file name, your code should be printing that it read 10 grocery items from the input file. So that's the point of printing. So these are the 5 tasks you will be doing inside main.c++, tasks 1 to task 5. And these two tasks are really important. We'll come to them. So yeah, next we'll go through the functions. So the first function that we'll be going through is add item. Or before this, this is main.c++. Let me go through the grocery list.cpp because I want to talk about other functions and come back to them. So this part is about grocery list.c++, and within grocery list.c++, you will be starting with default constructor. And the tasks that you will be doing in default constructor would be, remember that this is where we initialize all the private member variables with some default values. So we have a string variable or we have a special variable pointer, which is items. So your role is to set this to something called as null pointer. So this is one step. Whenever you have a pointers which are uninitialized, they're very dangerous. So you have to set them to something called as null pointer. And right here, you will be setting the capacity value with 0. And also within the default parameter, you will be setting the value of item count with 0. Okay, so this is what you'll be doing. And now the next step, just a second. Yeah, the next step is writing about parameterized constructor. Now, inside parameterized constructor, we will be doing different tasks. So the first task is initially still set the value of item count with 0. No matter what, item count is 0 in both the constructors. Now, the second task here is that this parameterized constructor grocery list is receiving a parameter called as capacity. Something, if you see the constructor name, it is grocery list. And the arguments, if you see, it is taking a capacity variable of integer type. This is how it is. So your role is that you have to use the this pointer access capacity and set its value to 0. Oh, sorry, set its value to capacity. And the third important thing, or the third step, which is very important step, which is giving a value or assigning an array dynamically to this variable called as items. So remember the dynamic memory allocation. We have a pointer which gets created in stack space. For this pointer, using the new operator, I want string array, and initially assuming that I would be needing items of capacity size. So whatever the capacity is, I want 3 memory slots. So this is something like items will be in stack space. And from stack space, you're asking for a dynamic array in heap space. And this dynamic array is going to allocate 3 strings for you. And remember, the name is items. And when dynamic array is allocated, you can access each slot as items of 0, items of 1, items of 2. This is the picture that we have currently. Okay, this is about parameterized constructor. Now, the third most important, or the third function that you are writing, and the most important one is add item function. Okay, so your role in add item is that the way add item function is written is it takes um, it takes a variable of type string. It takes a parameter of type string. Let's call it item. Okay, so here we have something of type item, which is string. So this is item. Now within add item function, your task is to add the whatever the item that you have received using item count as index. So initially item count is 0. So item count is pointing to this location. So what you will be doing is you will be using items. Remember, you can access private members of a class, and item count is the index. Using item count, simply set the value with the item that you received. So this is going to be milk for the first input. So you have something. And right as soon as you add something, your job is to update this variable that is keeping track for you. So this is the logic. Add an item, increment the pointer. But things get a bit tricky because here you have to check something else as well. Let me add that part as well. As long as, remember that for adding first, second, third items, we are good because we know the capacity. But one thing that we have to make sure is that if item count is reaching capacity or not, because capacity is 3. That means we can hold 3 items. That's what we allocated memory for. But in the input, if you see, for the first 3 items, milk, bread, and butter, we're actually good because we have 3 slots and all the 3 slots are here. So milk, bread, butter, all of these are good. And by the time we write 3 items, and then if we do item plus plus, there is nothing that's allocated for this memory slot, and it's going to point somewhere with some address that's not allocated by us. So just be careful and avoid that pitfall. What we will do is when item count reaches the capacity size, simply call resize function. Okay, remember resize function is a private member, and we cannot access private members outside the class definition. That is the why you will be writing resize dot or resize function in gross release dot. This is where you will be writing deep copy logic. This is where you are dynamically going to allocate more memory as the program runs. So I'll come to that part. So As long as item count is not capacity, you can run the code, remainder of the code as is, which is in items, in the item count slot, simply assign the item and simply do item count plus plus. So this is pretty much the add item function. And I'll come to print info, but before that, in grocery list.h, we have resize function. So this is a void function, meaning that it doesn't return anything and it neither accepts anything. So our job here is that when we are entering in this function, it means that the capacity of the list is less than the number of items in the list. So the first thing that we have to do here is that we have to update capacity such that capacity is now 2 times of whatever the value. So whatever the capacity is, simply double it. This is the first thing that we are doing. Doubling the capacity variable will not allocate new memory. So what we have to do is we will create something like a temporary list. This is something temp variable like how we use in swapping. We will create a temporary list. So I'm creating a temporary pointer and I'm calling it as, let's say, temp. And here I'm allocating new array dynamically, and this array is again containing strings, and now I'll be using new capacity value here. That means I am creating a dynamically allocated array which has more space. Now once I have that, we need to write for loop. Remember, we don't want to run into the risk of shallow copy, so write for loop. And what here we have to do is transfer items. Or let me show the way we write it. So assume that the initial index of temp array is 0 and you want to go all the way till capacity and you want to access, the next index elements. So what we are essentially doing with that step is that somewhere here, I'm creating a temp variable which points to another array in the heap space, and this array has double the capacity. Now it has 6 elements and each element can be accessed using temp of 0, temp of 1, and so on. That's how we can access. So what we will do in this for loop is we will simply say the ith value should be coming from items of ith value. That's what we are going to do. This is how we are going to allocate memory, and we are doing deep copy. So this is the idea of deep copy. Now two pointers having their own copy of the data. That's what deep copy is. Now once we are done with deep copy and all, the last step that we have to do is we have to point out items with the new value of temp. So that means uh, here, before doing this, we just have to do one more step. We have to use delete to delete all the items that we have. So this is an array. So the way we delete is in this way, delete items. So whatever the space allocated for items, you are deleting it. And lastly, you will be doing or pointing items to temp. So the idea is that you will be getting rid of this, and now you will be pointing to temp, where this first one is milk, second one is butter, bread, and so on. So in this way, you will be expanding the memory as the program is running, as you see more elements in the list. So that's the idea of this function, resize. And then we have two more functions to take care of. We have print list, the idea is to, it has to print each list that can be accessed using temp from the dynamic memory into the file. And one thing here is that I said it doesn't accept any parameter, but it accepts output file type. So whatever the output file that you are that we are creating here, it's called as O file. So you need to pass this parameter. So when you call this function from main.c++, so let me write that real quick. Yeah. So when you call this function print list from main.c++, you will be passing O file to it. So the idea of print list is that you will be writing output to the file. So instead of cout, I want you to use the variable output file, which is given in the um, function parameter. Now, your task is to simply say print grocery, and then the number of items in the grocery list. Notice the output in canvas. You have to print this label, and then you have to print the items. So items you can access through this variable called item count. And similarly, print all the items using the dynamic array. So that's the overall view of the assignment. And one last thing I just forgot. This class has destructor nav. Destructor starts with tilde and have same name as the class, but it doesn't accept any parameters. And you can only write one destructor per class. And the role of this destructor is to delete whatever the variable that we have, items. So you have to write logic here. That means when the class object is getting created in the parameterized constructor, if you notice, we are creating a dynamic array. And when the class is getting destructed, when the class is going out of scope, you are deleting the dynamically allocated memory. So as a result, when your program concludes, this is what it is going to be. Whatever the space that you allocated, you will be wiping it off completely. So this is the entire gist of the assignment. I'm really sorry if the video was lengthy to cover all these concepts, and I used it as one more chance to revise the topic of shallow and deep.